The mansion stood tall at the end of a wide, tree-lined street, its walls shining in the early morning sun. The gates opened slowly as the black car rolled inside, carrying the Billionaire family. The house was a symbol of success, wealth, and careful planning, with every corner reflecting the status of its owners. Inside, the atmosphere was different from the outside. Staff moved quietly, almost like a single organism, each person knowing their role perfectly. Among them was a maid who had served the family for many years. She was not young anymore, but she had a kind heart and a calm presence. She knew every room, every corner, and every habit of the family. Her uniform was always neat, and she carried herself with dignity, even if she sometimes felt invisible in a house filled with luxury. The mother of the Billionaire was already in the living room, her sharp eyes scanning the room for details that most people would never notice. She was a woman used to control and perfection, a woman whose pride in her social status was unmatched. She moved with purpose, her steps echoing on the polished floor. The son, the Billionaire, was younger, tall and confident. He had grown up surrounded by luxury, learning the ways of business and power. Yet beneath the polished exterior, he had a sense of curiosity about people and their emotions, though he rarely showed it openly. The morning started like any other, with the sound of soft chatter between staff, the clinking of dishes, and the distant hum of the city outside. The maid began her work early, tidying the living room, arranging cushions, and dusting the shelves. She paused for a moment, looking around, her eyes lingering on a photograph of the son as a child. Memories flooded back, times when he had been small, playful, and innocent, completely unaware of the wealth and power he would inherit. A small smile touched her lips, but it quickly faded as she returned to her duties. In this house, smiles were rare unless they served a purpose. The mother walked through the hall, examining everything with critical eyes. She stopped in front of the maid, noticing the neat uniform, the perfectly combed hair, and the calm demeanor. Yet something in her sharp mind whispered that nothing was ever perfect enough. She had planned a grand social event for the evening, inviting people who mattered in her world. Every detail had to be flawless, from the flowers to the silverware. The maid had been entrusted with many of these preparations, but the mother had little patience for mistakes, no matter how small. The son entered the room then, dressed in a tailored suit, his expression relaxed yet alert. He greeted the maid with a nod and a polite smile, something he did often but rarely lingered on. He watched his mother closely, aware of the tension that could fill the room at any moment. Despite the family's wealth, he had seen enough moments of fear in the staff to understand the delicate balance of power in the household. He valued the maid's loyalty and kindness, and he knew that sometimes she bore the brunt of his mother's strictness without complaint. As the morning passed, preparations for the evening event became the main focus. The maid moved gracefully around the house, her hands busy with arranging flowers, polishing furniture, and ensuring that everything looked perfect. The mother inspected her work periodically, offering sharp comments and instructions that left no room for misunderstanding. Her tone was firm, sometimes bordering on harsh, yet it was part of the household rhythm. The staff knew to follow without question, and the maid, with years of experience, handled it all silently. The son observed quietly, noticing small things. The way the maid paused when the mother's voice became sharp, the way she kept her hands steady, despite the tension in her shoulders. He felt a quiet admiration for her patience and resilience. In a household where appearances mattered more than feelings, she carried herself with a dignity that was rare. He wondered if his mother ever noticed, or if she was too absorbed in her own ideas of perfection to see the human side of those around her. Suddenly, a minor incident occurred that caught everyone's attention. A flower arrangement on the side table tilted slightly, and the maid reached to adjust it. The mother's sharp eyes caught the motion instantly, and her voice cut through the calm morning air. She moved closer, her expression severe as if a great wrong had been done. The maid straightened up immediately, ready to explain, but the mother's words were more than a critique. They were a display of authority and control. The staff in the room froze, watching the interaction with quiet tension. The air seemed heavier, charged with unspoken rules and expectations. The son stepped forward slightly, sensing the potential for humiliation. He had witnessed such moments before, where small mistakes were exaggerated into lessons in obedience. Yet he did not speak immediately, observing his mother's behavior with careful attention. He knew that in a house like this, one word from him could either calm the storm or escalate it. He chose to remain quiet for now, hoping to understand how the situation would unfold. The maid, despite her nerves, maintained her composure. She straightened the flower arrangement with precision, careful to avoid drawing further attention. Her hands moved steadily, but her heart raced. She had long learned to hide her emotions, to serve without complaint, and to carry herself with quiet dignity. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a sense of unease had begun to grow. She wondered if the day would pass without further confrontation, or if the tension would build into something more significant. The mother's attention shifted briefly, scanning the room for other imperfections. She gestured to a cushion on the sofa, slightly misaligned. The maid moved to correct it, her movement smooth and practiced. The son watched, noting the silent dialogue between the mother and the maid, a dialogue of power, control, and silent endurance. He felt a growing sense of discomfort, realizing how much pressure the maid had endured over the years, how often she had been the target of sharp words and critical eyes. He admired her silently, wishing there was a way to acknowledge her dedication without undermining the household's hierarchy. As the morning wore on, the house continued to buzz with activity. Other staff members moved about, performing their tasks with precision while the mother oversaw every detail with an unyielding eye. The maid continued her work, ensuring that the preparations for the evening event were flawless. She felt a mixture of pride and anxiety, a pride in her ability to manage the tasks and anxiety over potential criticism. She had learned to navigate these challenges over many years, but each day brought new tests of patience and composure. The son finally approached the maid during a brief moment of quiet. He offered a kind word, asking if she needed anything or if she was managing well. His tone was gentle, almost rare in a household dominated by strict rules and high expectations. The maid looked at him with a faint smile, grateful for the small gesture of recognition. She had served many people in her life, but moments like these reminded her that her efforts were seen, even if only quietly. The mother, meanwhile, continued her inspection, unaware or perhaps indifferent to the silent exchange between her son and the maid. She was focused entirely on perfection, on appearances, and on the social standing that dictated the family's life. Her actions, while harsh, were part of a mindset that valued control and status above all else. The maid, aware of this, moved carefully, balancing respect with self-preservation, performing her duties with skill and grace. By late morning, the house had been prepared for the next phase of the day. The maid had completed her tasks efficiently, but a sense of tension lingered in the air. The son reflected on what he had observed, feeling a mix of admiration for the maid and concern over his mother's strictness. He understood the complexities of their household, the interplay of wealth, power, and human emotion. He knew that the events of the day were just beginning, and that the quiet morning could quickly give way to situations that tested patience and character. The maid took a brief moment for herself, pausing in the sunlit hallway, her hands resting lightly on a polished railing. She allowed herself a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun and the brief reprieve from constant scrutiny. Yet she knew that this peace was temporary, that the pressures of the household would return with intensity. Still, in that moment, she felt a quiet sense of resilience, a reminder of her own strength and dignity. The son watched from a distance, sensing the silent courage that the maid displayed. He felt a growing awareness that wealth and luxury could not replace human kindness and empathy. The morning had unfolded with small tensions and quiet observations, setting the stage for events that would challenge the household's dynamics. He realized that the day ahead might reveal deeper truths about the family, the staff, and the values they each held. As the clock moved toward noon, the household prepared for the next phase of activity. The mother continued her detailed inspection. The maid continued her tasks with quiet efficiency, and the son observed, thoughtful and alert. The interactions of the morning had established a pattern, one of authority, endurance, and silent observation. The stage was set for the events that would follow, moments that would test relationships, reveal character, and challenge assumptions. The calm morning, with its unspoken tensions and quiet strength, was only the beginning of a day that would leave lasting impressions on everyone in the house. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long patterns on the marble floor. The household seemed to hum with quiet activity, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. The mother moved with purpose, her eyes scanning every detail of the room for even the slightest imperfection. The maid, calm and precise, followed the rhythm of her duties, adjusting, cleaning, and preparing with the kind of attention that came from years of experience. Despite her composure, a faint tension clung to her. The awareness that at any moment a simple mistake could bring sharp words and humiliation. Everything was in motion for the evening's grand event. Silverware gleamed, flowers were perfectly arranged, and furniture was meticulously polished. The staff moved like a well-practiced team, each person aware of the strict hierarchy within the house. The mother's expectations were high, and she watched closely, her eyes unrelenting, ready to pounce on any sign of negligence. The maid was careful, her hand steady as she adjusted a vase slightly to the left, then to the right, making sure it was perfect. She knew the mother's eyes would notice, and she worked silently, aware that even small errors could lead to public reprimand. The incident came suddenly, like a storm that had been quietly building. The maid, carrying a tray of freshly polished silver plates, moved carefully across the room. She had paused for a brief moment to avoid a smudge on the polished floor when the mother noticed. The mother's sharp eyes fixed on a small stain on the maid's uniform, something almost invisible but glaringly significant to her. Her hand shot out, gripping the fabric, and in a sudden, explosive gesture she tore a part of the uniform. The sound of ripping fabric echoed through the room like a sudden alarm. Staff froze, stunned by the unexpected act. The maid's face turned pale, her hands shaking as she tried to maintain balance, her dignity hanging by a thread. The room fell into a tense silence. The son standing nearby felt a mix of disbelief and anger rise in his chest. He had seen his mother's strictness before, but this level of humiliation was shocking. He noticed the maid's eyes glistening with tears, though she fought to hold them back. The other staff looked away, uncomfortable and uncertain, some biting their lips to stop from speaking. The mother, her face stern, seemed completely unaware of the emotional impact of her action. To her, it was a demonstration of authority, a reminder that everything must be perfect in her world. The maid's hands hovered over the torn uniform, unsure whether to adjust it or remove it. She had been trained to serve without complaint, to accept criticism without question. Yet the public tearing of her uniform struck at the core of her dignity. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself, and continued her work, her movements deliberate and careful. She avoided eye contact with the mother, focusing instead on the tasks that needed completion, hoping to move past the humiliation as quickly as possible. The son took a step forward, his voice steady but firm. He addressed his mother quietly at first, trying not to escalate the situation, suggesting that perhaps the maid could be given a moment to adjust or change her uniform. The mother's eyes flashed with irritation, her pride wounded by what she perceived as interference. The son, however, did not back down. He had learned over the years that respect and kindness could coexist with authority, and he felt a growing need to protect the dignity of someone who had faithfully served their family for so long. Other staff members watched in silence, sensing that the household hierarchy was being challenged, though subtly. The maid, aware of the son's intervention, felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because someone had acknowledged her. Apprehension because the tension in the room had escalated. She moved to the side, quietly attempting to fix the uniform, her hands gentle as she tried to patch the tear with temporary care. Every movement was cautious, measured, a silent plea for understanding in a world that often demanded silent endurance. The mother, sensing the shift in the room, turned her attention fully to the son. Her voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the tension, questioning his interference. The son stood firm, his words calm but resolute, expressing that while the household must maintain standards, human dignity could never be overlooked. He spoke of respect, loyalty, and the long years of service the maid had given. His voice carried a weight that surprised the mother, who had rarely been challenged in matters of authority. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how this confrontation would unfold. The maid remained quiet, her heart racing but her hands steady. She had learned long ago that words often complicated situations, and sometimes silence was the only shield. She continued her work, cleaning, adjusting, and arranging, her eyes occasionally flicking to the son with a quiet gratitude. The subtle support he offered gave her strength, a reminder that even in a household dominated by control and status, Small gestures of understanding could carry immense power. The mother's expression shifted slightly, though only subtly. There was a flicker of awareness, a brief moment where she seemed to consider the emotional impact of her actions. Yet pride and habit were strong forces, and she quickly returned to her critical stance, instructing the maid on tasks with the usual sharpness. The tension lingered, but a new undercurrent had formed. A silent understanding between the son and the maid, a quiet acknowledgement of shared respect that transcended the rigid hierarchy of the household. As the afternoon progressed, preparations for the evening event continued, but the incident left a mark on everyone present. The maid worked with precision, aware that every movement was scrutinized, but also with a renewed sense of quiet resilience. The son observed, noticing the strength she displayed under pressure, and feeling a growing determination to ensure that the household standards did not come at the cost of human dignity. The mother moved from room to room, inspecting, adjusting, and commenting with her usual authority. She was meticulous, her mind focused on perfection, yet the earlier confrontation with her son lingered in her thoughts, even if only briefly. She began to notice in small, subtle ways the loyalty and effort of her staff, though her pride still demanded a stern exterior. The household's atmosphere had shifted imperceptibly. Tension mingled with a cautious respect that hinted at changes yet to come. The maid continued her tasks, balancing efficiency with careful attention to her appearance and composure. She knew the evening would be challenging, with guests arriving and social expectations at their peak. Yet she carried herself with quiet dignity, her mind focused on the work and the small acts of recognition she had received. The son occasionally offered brief words of encouragement, gestures that spoke volumes in a house where such recognition was rare. The room buzzed with quiet activity, preparations reaching their final stages. Every detail, from flower arrangements to silverware placement, was examined and perfected. The maid moved seamlessly through the space, her hands steady, her mind alert. She felt a strange mix of anxiety and calm, a tension born from the mother's earlier actions, balanced by the subtle support of the son. She reminded herself that her strength lay in patience, in resilience, and in the dignity with which she carried herself. As the sun began to lower, casting warm golden light into the mansion, the household prepared for the arrival of guests. The maid took a moment to pause, adjusting a curtain and straightening a chair. She reflected briefly on the events of the day, the humiliation, the silent support, the complex dynamics of power and respect. Despite the challenges, she felt a quiet sense of determination. She would continue to serve with grace, maintain her dignity, and navigate the household's complexities with the experience she had gained over many years. The son observed her from a distance, aware of the strength and patience required to endure such treatment. He felt a growing responsibility, an understanding that his position of influence could bring fairness and respect to those around him. He resolved to continue supporting the maid, subtly but firmly, and to challenge any actions that undermined human dignity. The afternoon had been a test, revealing the vulnerabilities and strengths within the household, and the events of this day would leave lasting impressions on everyone involved. The mother, focused on the final touches, remained largely unaware of the internal shifts occurring around her. Her attention was on perfection, on maintaining control, and on ensuring that the evening would reflect her standards. Yet the subtle challenges, the quiet acts of resilience, and the silent gestures of respect were slowly reshaping the dynamics of the household. The maid's composure and the son's quiet intervention had created a ripple effect, setting the stage for changes that would continue to unfold as the day progressed. As the house settled into the final preparations, the tension of the earlier incident lingered like a shadow, influencing every movement, every glance, every instruction. The maid continued her work, maintaining her dignity despite the emotional strain. The son watched, thoughtful and resolute, understanding that this day marked a turning point, a moment where respect, loyalty, and human dignity had quietly challenged the rigid structures of wealth and authority. The stage was set for the evening, a moment. Even as the afternoon faded into evening, the mansion felt heavy with unspoken words and lingering tension. The staff moved with careful precision, aware of the events that had unfolded earlier. The maid, despite her best efforts to maintain composure, could not completely shake off the embarrassment and the faint ache in her chest. Her uniform, patch temporarily felt like a visible reminder of the mother's harsh action. She moved quietly through the rooms, adjusting table settings, checking the flower arrangements, and making sure everything was ready for the guests. Every gesture was careful, deliberate, and measured, as if any wrong movement could draw sharp attention again. The son, who had been watching the dynamics all day, sensed the ripple effect the incident had caused among the staff. Whispers passed quickly through the rooms as other employees quietly speculated about what had happened, their voices low, almost conspiratorial. The maid's peers looked at her with sympathy, and some exchanged glances with the son, silently acknowledging the unfairness of the situation. The son felt a quiet sense of responsibility, realizing that he could no longer be a mere observer. He wanted to protect those who had shown loyalty, kindness, and diligence without complaint. The mother, meanwhile, moved through the rooms with her usual scrutiny. She seemed oblivious to the emotional currents running through the household, her mind consumed with the upcoming event and the guests who would judge her based on appearances alone. To her, the maid's uniform and demeanor were a reflection of the standards she demanded. She did not realize, or perhaps did not care, that the subtle cruelty of her actions had left an impression that would not easily fade. The son approached the maid quietly as she adjusted a centerpiece on the dining table. His voice was low, so only she could hear, offering words of encouragement and reassurance. He spoke not of wealth, authority, or social standing, but of respect, gratitude, and recognition for her hard work. The maid looked up briefly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and a quiet gratitude. She nodded almost imperceptibly, appreciating the small acknowledgement that contrasted sharply with the public humiliation she had suffered earlier. The atmosphere in the mansion grew tense as the time for the evening event drew near. Guests would arrive soon, bringing with them the unspoken expectations of wealth, status, and etiquette. The mother continued her final inspections, adjusting silverware, moving cushions, and instructing staff on minor details with unwavering precision. Yet beneath the surface, the household had shifted. The maid, though outwardly composed, carried a sense of silent strength, and the son's quiet interventions had introduced a new undercurrent of fairness and acknowledgement. In the staff quarters, whispers continued. Other maids and housekeepers spoke softly among themselves about the earlier incident, sharing their perspectives on the mother's strictness and the maid's patience. The maid herself listened silently, her mind focusing on the tasks at hand rather than joining in the discussion. She had learned long ago that discretion and professionalism were her shields, that silence could sometimes protect both dignity and career, yet she also allowed herself brief moments of reflection, recognizing that the events of the day had changed something, subtle but significant, in the household dynamics. The son moved through the house, checking on preparations and quietly encouraging staff where needed. He noticed the careful balance the maid maintained, her ability to work efficiently despite emotional strain, and he felt a deep respect for her resilience. He considered how his mother's actions might affect not just this evening, but the long-term morale of the staff. He knew that authority without compassion could create resentment, fear, and inefficiency, and he quietly resolved to address these issues in his own way, with subtle interventions and acknowledgement. As the mansion's grand doors opened to welcome the first guests, the maid completed her final tasks in the dining area. Her hands were steady, her movements precise. Yet there was a quiet tension in her posture, a lingering memory of the earlier humiliation. She adjusted the silverware one last time, straightened the napkins, and moved with the calm efficiency that had always defined her work. The son observed, sensing both her dedication and the emotional weight she carried. He understood that respect for the staff was not a simple gesture, but a recognition of their humanity, their patience, and their often overlooked contributions. The mother greeted the guests with her usual poise, smiling and chatting in a manner that reflected confidence and status. Yet even in her polished demeanor, there were moments where the son noticed subtle rigidity, a need to control every aspect of the evening. He could see how this obsession with perfection might blind her to the human costs, the quiet strain on those who supported her lifestyle. He wondered if this evening could offer a chance for reflection, or if it would only reinforce the patterns of control and authority that had defined the household for years. The maid moved silently in the background, ensuring that everything ran smoothly. She refilled drinks, adjusted chairs, and discreetly corrected minor misalignments in table settings. Guests, preoccupied with conversation and the luxurious surroundings, barely noticed her presence, but she did not mind. Her satisfaction came from doing her work well, from maintaining dignity and efficiency under pressure. The son occasionally offered subtle nods of acknowledgement, which she received with quiet gratitude, feeling that someone finally recognized her efforts without judgment. The tension of the earlier incident lingered, subtly shaping interactions within the household. The mother's authority was unquestioned in public, but the son's quiet interventions and the maid's resilience had introduced a new dynamic. Staff moved with careful efficiency, aware that mistakes could be noticed, yet inspired by the example of dignity and calm displayed by the maid. The son watched, feeling a mix of pride and concern, understanding that true leadership required balancing authority with empathy, and that even small acts of recognition could have profound effects. As the evening progressed, conversations among the guests flowed freely, focused on social matters, business deals, and polite gossip. The staff, led by the maid's quiet example, maintained flawless service, navigating the demands of the evening with precision. Yet the son noticed the subtle tension in the air, the quiet awareness among staff of the earlier incident, and the lingering effects on morale. He understood that while appearances were maintained, the emotional landscape had shifted, creating ripples that might continue long after the guests had left. During a brief pause in the evening's activities, the son approached the maid again, this time in a quieter corner of the room. He spoke in low tones, offering reassurance and acknowledging her efforts with genuine sincerity. The maid met his gaze, and in that moment a quiet understanding passed between them. Words were not necessary. The son's respect and recognition were evident in his tone, his attention, and the subtle gestures that communicated more than mere politeness. The maid's eyes reflected a mix of relief, gratitude, and quiet pride. Despite the humiliation earlier in the day, she felt seen, even if only in small, meaningful ways. The mother, occupied with her guests, remained largely unaware of the quiet exchange. Her focus was on maintaining appearances, ensuring that the evening reflected her standards of elegance and control. Yet the subtle changes in the household were beginning to take shape, even if unnoticed. The maid's composed strength, the son's quiet interventions, and the shifting dynamics among the staff created a delicate balance that would influence the household long after the event concluded. As the evening drew on, the mansion glowed with warmth, laughter, and the soft sounds of conversation. The maid continued her work, her movements precise and graceful, balancing efficiency with careful attention to her appearance and composure. The son observed her from a distance, feeling a sense of responsibility and admiration. He knew that true leadership involved not just authority but fairness, recognition, and empathy, and he quietly resolved to continue advocating for dignity and respect in a household where appearances often overshadowed humanity. By the time the guests began to leave, the house had returned to a quieter rhythm. The maid completed her final tasks, straightening chairs, refilling water glasses, and ensuring that every corner reflected care and attention. The son checked in with her one last time for the evening, offering a small but meaningful word of appreciation. She nodded, her face calm but her eyes reflecting the gratitude and relief of being acknowledged. The mother, satisfied with the evening's success, retreated to her private quarters, still largely unaware of the quiet shifts that had occurred among her staff and within her own family. The aftermath of the incident lingered in subtle ways. The staff, inspired by the maid's composure and the son's interventions, carried a renewed sense of purpose and respect. The maid, despite the humiliation she endured earlier, maintained her dignity and professionalism, navigating the complexities of the household with quiet resilience. The son reflected on the lessons of the day, understanding the importance of balancing authority with empathy and the power of subtle, meaningful acknowledgement. The mother, preoccupied with social success, remained largely unaware of the emotional currents that had quietly reshaped the household dynamics. As night fell and the mansion settled into quiet, the maid paused for a brief moment by a window, looking out at the moonlit garden. She reflected on the events of the day, the humiliation, the silent support, the small acts of recognition, and felt a quiet sense of strength. Despite the challenges, she had maintained her dignity, navigated the complexities of the household, and endured with grace. The son, observing from a distance, felt a growing determination to ensure that fairness and respect would continue to guide his interactions with those who served the family. The day had revealed the power of quiet resilience, empathy, and human dignity, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. That would test patience, reveal character, and perhaps bring about change in ways that none of them could yet imagine. The mansion was quiet now. The evening event concluded, but the echoes of the day lingered in the hallways. The staff moved carefully, returning items to their proper places and finishing last-minute tasks. But there was a sense of reflection in the air. The maid, tired yet composed, worked steadily, her movements calm despite the emotional strain she had endured earlier. She felt the weight of the mother's harsh actions, but also the subtle support of the son, whose quiet interventions had made her feel seen. She knew that tonight had been a turning point, though the full effects were yet to unfold. The son remained in the house, walking through the rooms in silence. He observed the staff, noticing their dedication and the quiet tension that had carried over from the afternoon. He could see the maid in the distance, adjusting a vase and straightening a cushion, her hands steady, her posture composed. He admired her patience and strength, realizing that her dedication went beyond duty. It was a reflection of resilience, character, and a quiet sense of pride. He felt a growing determination to address the imbalance he had witnessed, to ensure that respect and dignity were acknowledged in ways that the mother had overlooked. Meanwhile, the mother moved through the house, inspecting the aftermath of the event. She noted the cleanliness, the arrangement of furniture, and the polished surfaces with satisfaction. To her, the evening had been a success, a reflection of her control and attention to detail. Yet she seemed oblivious to the subtle changes that had occurred, to the quiet recognition and respect forming between her son and the staff. She continued to enforce her standards, unaware that her actions had left lingering impressions that could no longer be ignored. The son approached the maid quietly, motioning for her to follow him to a smaller private room away from the main halls. The maid, cautious yet curious, followed, her movements deliberate. Once inside, the son spoke in gentle, steady tones. He acknowledged the day's events, expressing genuine regret that she had been subjected to public humiliation. He spoke of her years of service, her loyalty, and her strength, emphasizing that her efforts were not invisible. The maid listened quietly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a subtle warmth that had been missing for much of the day. She spoke softly in return, sharing her feelings without accusation, explaining that while she had endured harsh treatment before, the tearing of her uniform had been particularly painful. Her words were measured, reflecting both dignity and restraint. She did not ask for change or revenge, but simply sought acknowledgement of the emotional weight she had carried silently. The son listened intently, understanding the depth of her experience and the resilience required to maintain composure in a household where authority often overshadowed humanity. The conversation continued for a while, quiet and respectful. The son encouraged the maid to take pride in her work and assured her that her dedication was noticed and valued. He emphasized that loyalty and service should never come at the cost of dignity and self-respect. The maid nodded, her composure steady, yet her eyes betrayed a hint of the emotional release she felt. In that room, away from the polished surfaces and critical eyes, there was a moment of connection, understanding, and mutual respect. Later, the son sought an opportunity to speak privately with his mother. He approached her in the study, where she was reviewing notes for future social events. His tone was calm but firm, expressing concern over the earlier incident with the maid's uniform. He spoke of dignity, respect, and the importance of valuing the contributions of those who had served the family faithfully. The mother listened, her initial expression unreadable, a mix of surprise and mild irritation. She had rarely been challenged in her actions, and her son's approach was unexpected. The son explained that while the household's appearance and standards were important, human kindness and acknowledgement were equally significant. He shared observations of the maid's dedication and strength, emphasizing that her work and loyalty deserved recognition rather than humiliation. The mother's gaze softened briefly, though her pride remained intact. She remained silent for a moment, reflecting on her son's words and the subtle challenge they presented to her long-held approach to authority. The conversation marked the beginning of a subtle shift. The mother did not immediately change, nor did she fully acknowledge her mistake, but a seed of awareness had been planted. The son's firm yet gentle insistence had highlighted the importance of balancing control with compassion, and she could not ignore it entirely. In the quiet study, away from the formalities of the household, there was a recognition that authority alone was insufficient without empathy. Meanwhile, the maid returned to her duties, her movements precise but her heart lighter. She carried herself with renewed dignity, aware that her dedication had been recognized and that the son had spoken up on her behalf. The household continued its quiet rhythm, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The staff moved with confidence, inspired by the example of composure, respect, and quiet courage. The day's events had created ripples that would influence interactions, expectations, and relationships long after the evening had ended. As the night deepened, the mansion became still, the echoes of footsteps and voices fading. The maid paused in a hallway, reflecting on the day's challenges and the unexpected moments of understanding. She had endured public humiliation, navigated authority with skill, and maintained her dignity. She had also experienced recognition and support, subtle but meaningful, that reminded her of the importance of human connection, respect, and acknowledgement. The son observed from a distance, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had acted in a way that upheld dignity and encouraged fairness. The mother, in her private quarters, continued to contemplate the conversation with her son. Though her pride remained, there was a small, quiet reflection on the impact of her actions, the emotional weight carried by the maid, and the importance of balancing authority with compassion. The household, though outwardly calm and orderly, had undergone subtle changes. The day's events had revealed lessons in empathy, resilience, and respect, leaving impressions that could not easily be erased. The son walked through the mansion one last time before retiring for the night. He observed the staff, the orderly rooms, and the polished surfaces, but more importantly, he noticed the subtle strength, patience, and dignity of the maid who had endured so much. He felt a quiet determination to continue advocating for fairness and respect, understanding that leadership was as much about human kindness as it was about authority. The events of the day had left him with clarity, resolve, and a deep appreciation for those who quietly contributed to the household's success. In the quiet of the night, the mansion seemed to breathe, the tension of the day easing into reflection and calm. The maid, standing by a window, gazed at the moonlit garden, contemplating her own resilience and the recognition she had received. The son observed her quietly, feeling a sense of respect and admiration that could not be measured by wealth or status. The mother in her room remained absorbed in thought, beginning to recognize, even if subtly, the importance of balancing her authority with empathy and respect. By the end of the night, the household had returned to a peaceful rhythm, but the lessons of the day lingered. The maid carried herself with quiet strength, aware of her own value and the recognition she had received. The son felt a growing responsibility to uphold dignity and fairness within the household. The mother, though still proud and strict, had been confronted with the consequences of her actions and the importance of compassion. The events of the day had created subtle but lasting changes, shaping relationships, expectations, and the dynamics of authority, respect, and human dignity within the mansion. The morning after the grand event arrived quietly, with soft sunlight spilling into the mansion through tall windows. The house,